Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining our program. I'm very, very happy to have a wonderful role model guest, someone who sort of expands our imagination. I also have today as my co-host Dr. Philly Zuniga, and he is an educational doctorate, newly minted. So we thank him for helping us to come along. Yeah, I followed his progress from when he started as an undergraduate all the way through his PhD. So really happy. But he also holds a leadership role also in the colleges of California. I'll let him share that through the show. Our guest today is Dr. Jose Morey. He's an MD, or sometimes known as Dr. Intergalactic. Well, we're going to have to talk about that one. I love that one. That's how I came the initial contact. Oh my gosh, he is huge amount of support for STEM, Latinos, Latinas. His background has a personal STEM literacy background in AI, quantum computing, aerospace, business intelligence, 3D printing, radiology, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, folks. He sits on advisory boards, MIT, NASA, White House Office of Science and Technology, some special categories, and it goes on and on and on and on. But the point of the matter is that one of the main points that he brought to us, that he speaks, and when I did some research and background, is his emphasis of getting more students of color into the STEM fields. And I guess, your wonderful book, Good Night, Little Astronauts, which I'm very happy to have, is part of that whole package. So enough of me. Let's switch over to you. And let's begin with that. I mean, you have all these fantastic responsibilities across the board, across the nation, and yet you take the time to look at the future, to look at children, to look at our future leaders. What stimulated you to go this route?
Yeah, no, well, thank you, Armando and Felix, for the opportunity to come speak with you today. And Felix, congratulations on the doctorate, well deserved. It's not an easy road, and we need more Latinos getting advanced degrees. So kudos to you. But it's because of my career, really, what inspired me. I finished medical school, and after that, I did my postdoc training up in the Northeast, and that kind of changed my trajectory from just straight clinical medicine into more technology. Worked with IBM for several years as a consultant, and then eventually as associate chief health officer for IBM Watson Health when that got spun out of the research labs that not only that I was working in, but other research labs throughout the world as well. Then I worked with Elon Musk's Hyperloop project through Hyperloop Transportation Technologies. I was chief of innovation there, still innovation lead and consult. And I've worked as a consultant to NASA through their iTech program on deep space programs, as well as through JPL on planetary defense projects. With the White House Office's Science Technology Policy, as you mentioned, particularly around AI projects to expedite COVID research over the last 12 to 16 months. Also similar emerging technology projects through the United Nations World Food Program and other organizations like MIT, where I consult for Solve and Ideas, which are two accelerators for them. And I also work with the Legatum Center for Entrepreneurship, developing social impact solutions for low and middle income countries. But in those roles that I've played and in those experiences that I've had, I've oftentimes been the only Hispanic, definitely the only Puerto Riqueño on these projects, and sometimes the only minority on these projects altogether. And within STEM and STEAM in these fields, which it's the fields that are driving the economy today and will increase the drive of the economy into the future. There's a lack of diversity here in the United States. We don't have a lot of BIPOC people within those fields. We don't have gender identity diversity. We don't have gender diversity. We don't have people with disabilities diversity within there as well. So it's the fact that there's this lack of diversity within science and technology, which forced me to try to create a solution. I talk to my mentees and others the importance of, try to create and be involved in projects and create the world that you want to see. And I want to see a world within science and technology that is as diverse as the real world around us. So I'm creating the solution or trying to solve the problem. And the way we need to do that is we need to inspire kids of all backgrounds that are underrepresented within STEM right now to go into the fields of science and technology. And the data shows that we need to catch them early, we need to inspire them early, and we need to grow with them, as they say, from K to career, to be able to keep that inspiration going, because we know that girls, people from BIPOC communities, others, even if we do catch them early on, they tend to fall off over time for a lot of different reasons. So we have to be able to continue to inspire them. So at Astra Media, I started at the end of 2019 with the help of the Eisenhower Foundation. I'm an Eisenhower Fellow, to be able to create media that shows representation of diverse people within fields of science and technology through entertaining content. And we imbue education into that as well, to be able to teach as we go along. But we want to inspire kids so that they see themselves. We have that whole concept: if you can't see it, you can't be it. So we want to let kids see themselves in those roles, people that look like them, people that speak like them, people that have shared community with where they grew up, how they grew up. And that way we can get the kids to start dreaming about being those things. And so that when they start growing up, they start saying, oh, you know what, I want to be a nurse like X. I want to be a doctor like Y. I want to be a computer scientist like whoever. We want them to be able to know stories of people that are like them, be inspired by people like them, instead of what you typically see in media, which is, people from underrepresented communities aren't playing, that role. They usually are in kind of a minor role or some other tertiary role when it comes to what's going on. So we want to really put those characters front and center.
Let me sort of look at it from what I've heard is some arguments at times for lack of support, if you will. Somebody says, well, there aren't any. If there were any outstanding minorities, we would see them in this room, but they're not. So obviously they're not there. How would you respond to that discussion?
I would say that that's a very foolish and kind of short-sighted statement. There are plenty of people of color. There are plenty of women. There are plenty of people with disabilities. They're not enough for sure. So I would agree with that. We need more, and we need to be pushing that, because at the STEM fields, as we know, they're the higher socioeconomic fields. So we need to get socioeconomic strengths to be able to do that. You need to inspire and study those things. And there are comorbidities, as I say from my physician background, that tend to go along with being part of a lower socioeconomic status, whether that means you live in a digital desert, in a healthcare desert, in an educational desert. All that stems with socioeconomics. And the data shows us that as socioeconomic rises, those things tend to go away. Those comorbidities tend to be resolved. So there are people in those communities that look like us, that speak like us, that come from our backgrounds. I grew up in El Velde in Caguas, right near the baseball field, so baseball park. So there are people that have our stories, but we're not out there. We're not telling our stories. So one of the things I'm doing, I have an upcoming book that's going to be for 15 years old and older, to inspire kids, where I interview diverse leaders within science and technology and have those discussions. That's going to be coming out Q1 2022. I have another book again for 15 plus coming out in October through Wiley Publishing, which talks about the evolution of Latino leaders. I did it in conjunction with Frank Carvajal, my co-author. So there are the stories that are out there. We need to just be telling them so that kids know about them, so that kids say, oh, I could do that. I could be CEO, or I could be senior vice president of that tech company or of that particular industry. They are there. They're just not being told. But part of that problem also lies in the scientific community. We have not been out there and been engaging in popular culture. We've been allowing other people to do that. And part of that is kind of the people that go into science and technology. You know, they're so dedicated in their fields, are so dedicated in their studies, and they may not be, you know, as gregarious or extroverted as we require, but realistically, we have a responsibility, especially when we come from underrepresented communities, to be out there, to try to be role models, to try to inspire the next generation, because we have to be building this. Generational wealth takes a village to develop. So we have to be out there to be able to cultivate that inspiration for the next generation. So part of that is on us. And I realized that I had the opportunity, the ability, and the responsibility to be doing my part. So that's why I created Astra Media, to start playing that role and to give others a platform where they can be elevated as well. So telling those stories to bring inspiration to the next generations.
Wow, that's fantastic. Felix?
Wow, there's just, you know, so much. First of all, congratulations on all your accomplishments and everything that you're going to do as well. I applaud, you know, the use of aspirational capital, right? Coming from a community cultural wealth framework, and providing opportunities for our kids to see themselves in the future, right? There was just so many things that came to mind in the last couple of statements, but, you know, I heard you talk about STEAM and STEM, right? And can you talk about the importance of arts in STEM?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the people that I speak a lot of, that I hold up as an avatar, is Leonardo da Vinci, you know, the prototypical Renaissance person. And he was one of the reasons I say that he's such a great inventor, was because he combined the sciences and the art. You know, if you asked a group of 100 people, who was Leonardo da Vinci, or what did he do? A lot of people would say he was an artist, but you would have a considerable number of people that say he was a scientist and inventor. And the thing is, if you ask Leonardo himself, he wouldn't pick one, right? Because he didn't see himself through those lenses. He was constantly cultivating his skill sets, left brain and right brain. And that's what allowed him to remain innovative and be able to push the envelope. And as he learned about the arts, his art skills improved his science skills. As he learned about different aspects of science, whether it be chemistry, engineering, geometry, each of one of those skills augmented those other skills and also augmented his art. And you can see that in things like, you know, St. Jerome of the Wilderness. You can see that with the way he played with optics on the Last Supper. You can see that with the way he kind of, in the facial features that he has and things like the Mona Lisa. Like, you could see the crossover. If you look at any of his sketchbooks, I mean, it's any one of those pages could be, you know, a scientific novel. At the same time, it could be, you know, put into the Louvre. It's just amazing how it collaborated. So STEAM, in my opinion, is the engine that drives innovation. It's very, very important. And I oftentimes, when I do consultancy work for a tech company, you know, they're trying to develop a project, and they'll have people that have the same background. You know, you'll have 5 PhDs that all are mechanical engineers, and like, you know, what do we need to kind of get to where we need to? And I said, well, go out and get somebody with a humanitarian degree, go out and get somebody with an arts degree, go out and get, and they're like, what? That's not the skill set that we were thinking. No, that is the skill set that you need, because it's like when you're trying to make the picture of an elephant, if everyone is touching the same part of the elephant because that's the only thing they know, they're only just going to describe that. But when you start looking at it from a different perspective, because you don't have that internal bias, then you can come with a really novel solution. Steve Jobs gave this lecture that he'd also always talk about, that innovation lies at the intersection between technology and art. It's at that point, that's where you become innovative. So that's the really most important part. Arts is integral to science and technology, because at the end of the day, everything in life is about people. You know, that's something from Latino perspectives that I feel like it's always been an advantage to our community, because we're very family centric, we're very community centric, and that always gives you an advantage. And if you start looking at everything's about people, arts and humanities, that's what gets you to remember why you're doing something. If you get stuck in the tech side and the zeros and ones, it can be very cold, and it can be, and it's not just something has to be technically appropriate, like the iPhone. The iPhone works, and it's an amazing piece of technology, but the iPhone wouldn't have been as successful if it wasn't also aesthetically pleasing, if it didn't integrate with how you as a human can interact with an object. And so it's the combination of something that's both technically proficient but then aesthetically advanced. That's when you get something that becomes revolutionary, like a piece of technology like a smartphone.
You shared the idea of the advantage of being Latino, and we are also very heavily arts oriented. I mean, you go to Puerto Rico, or you go to Mexico, you see all the coloring and the murals, and we take that for granted. But one of the interesting points is that you keep saying, you're stated as quoted as saying that Puerto Rico can become a Silicon Valley, and that's a unique idea. I like the idea that it doesn't have to be in one place over in California. Why do you think that's possible?
So what I call, and you're referencing my Forbes article, and what I spoke about Puerto Rico there was I called it's the Silicon Island. So we can take what Silicon Valley has done and we can transport it to Puerto Rico. And the thing is that we have to change the mindset. And that's, you asked also what kind of an inspiration for what I'm doing. And after the community as a whole, underrepresented communities as a whole, the divide between the haves and have-nots, it's only going to increase if we don't get on board with the new economy, with the silicon collars, the new generation of STEM. That's where it's going, and that we have to be ready for that. Not just for communities that aren't represented to be able to grow and generate generational wealth, but for the country as a whole, the United States, to be competitive at a global level. You need to embrace the diversity that you have here. Diversity has always been an advantage to the United States. If you look at the Olympics, almost every other country is completely homogenous. What's been the greatest strength for the US has been our diversity. Sometimes it's what causes so much strife in the country, but realistically, it's been the greatest strength to our country. And that demographic of that diversity is changing. And if the future majority of the population isn't ready to compete in those fields, then the economic power of the United States is going to fall. So we need to be constantly generating a pipeline of that. Now, specifically to your question about the Silicon Island perspective, well, we saw what happened with Hurricane Maria. We saw what happened with all the other, natural disasters that are going on across the world. People from underrepresented communities tend to be affected more by these global cataclysmic events, whether they be climate change, whether they be pandemics. Why? Because it opens up a very brittle skeleton that you have of systemic inequality that's been built into the world. And so the ones that are already most disaffected are the ones that are going to feel the effects of these kinds of change. So we saw what happened to the island after the hurricanes, where when you have an economy that is so heavily based on tourism, in a world in which climate change is a reality, which we have to adapt to what's going on because of the consequences of not making decisions earlier, then that makes you have to reinvent yourself. And look what happened during COVID. The jobs that got affected the most were those low-income front-end worker jobs. Those are the people that were out the door. Those were the people that were affected the most. But the people that had those STEM jobs, they could transition to working from home, right? They could transition to working through Zoom and having all these kind of mobile things. So that's what I want for the island. That's what I aspire to create for them as well. Transitioning them from a primarily tourism, there will always be a sector for that and a need for that, but being able to have a more robust economy to be able to withstand those global cataclysmic events that will continue throughout the world, whether it's climate change, whether it's another pandemic, in 10, 20 years, whatever the issue is, so that you can have a robust economy. It's all about diversification and being able to prepare for what could happen in the future. So you need to be able to set the groundwork for it. And I think the island has the capability to become a Silicon Island. We have a growing ecosystem of startups. We have that kind of support, but you need to bring different factors together. You need to have the government on board with their support, academia, you need the private sector and the public sector coming together, creating those unique public-private partnerships to be able to generate intellectual property, to be able to stimulate startups, to be able to create new jobs of the future. I think it's possible, and I think the foundation is there. So that's why I'm a strong proponent of it.
I was in San Juan, Puerto Rico a couple of years ago, part of a tour that I was doing, and the lights went out in the city at 8 o'clock in the evening. So I thought, my gosh, the centers of the island, and that the need for strengthening the infrastructure and being able to anticipate and act on that. So you mentioned that the importance, and so and that's not a third world country, but yet.
It shouldn't be. It should not be.
It's being treated as one, I think.
Yeah.
But that's a political statement I'm making. Felix, I know you had a question.
Yeah, no, pivoting on infrastructure, more about personal infrastructure. Can you talk about the role that mentorship played in helping you get to where you've been? And it's a two-part question. The second part would be, we talked about diversity and the value of diversity. What can leaders of the organizations that you participated in do to walk the walk, right? As opposed to just talking the talk about diversity, which we've heard a lot of over the many years as well, especially since last year and the Black Lives Matter movement. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk about change, but can you talk to those 2 points? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions too. And I don't have a problem getting a little political, Armando. It's up to your audience, but
Hey, go for it.
yeah. But no, for a mentorship perspective, it's a huge part of it. You need those mentors. In STEM, I did not have mentors that came from my background. I did not have, Latinos or Boricuas that kind of brought me through my career. But it shows you the importance of having those kinds of things, right? Having people that look like you, and not just having those that look like you and developing a mentor perspective, but then also cultivating mentees and getting mentees to develop into mentors. It's a skill set that needs to be taught. And it's very, very important. It's one of the most important things. And ideally, as a mentor, as you develop mentees, the way I look at it is my goal is to not to teach mentees to get to my level. I want mentees to surpass me. My goal is for whoever I am cultivating to go farther and further than I ever did in whatever aspect that they want to go in, because that's what you should be looking for in your mentees. But it also shows you, because I did not have my own Latino mentors besides people within my family, which will get back to in a second. But it also shows you the vital importance of having allies throughout your journey, and why the majority is just as important to educate in these things. We talk about the content that we're creating, having diverse stories and diverse representation. And yes, it's important for kids growing up to see themselves in those positions. So that content is for them, but it's equally or even greater of importance for the majority to be able to see that representation as well, because they are the ones that control. They are the gatekeepers. They are the ones that are in power. And so when they see someone, a Latino kid with first name Jose, last name Morey, or a little Afro-Caribbean kid, or anyone that's coming in, someone with a different gender identity coming into a field, they need to be able to have an understanding that that person, regardless of what they look like, does play a role in their company, and they need to be able to give them access, because even though they might be the first one that looks like that, they should not have a bias that keeps them from not allowing that person in. And anything that we do, the minority can speak truth to power, but at the end of the day, the majority has to be on board. There has to be allies that are made, because at the end of the day, slavery would not have been abolished if it wasn't for the majority. Women's suffrage would not have happened if it wasn't for the male majority. The civil rights movement would not have occurred if it wasn't for a white majority that helped it to occur. Now, it was the minority that was always fighting and the ones that were suffering for it, absolutely, but they had to find allies. So we have to help cultivate the majority to help us get to those levels as well. And that's something that people tend to forget, and that we need to do. And then us, from an underrepresented community, we have to elevate our leaders that are already there, and we have to teach them to be mentors, and we have to get them out there and get them into the ecosystem of speaking and not being afraid to speak up, because there are generations that need to see them and need to aspire to be like them. So it's an important thing that we have to be cultivating that within the leaders that we have, because as Armando said, oh, well, what about the people that say that there are people that aren't like that? Well, we need to get them out there. We need to get them talking. We need to give them a platform to be able to do that.
I heard recently about someone say, I don't need allies, I'm looking for accomplices, right? So just something on that. Armando.
I like it, but we have to remember those things too from our perspective, right? Because as Latinos, we need to be reminded that we have our own kind of issues that we have to think about. Misogyny and patriarchy, it doesn't only happen in the majority. We have a lot of those issues in our own community. So as we have, especially our LGBTQ plus friends and family that are coming up, we have to be cognizant that we have to be an ally to those as their kind of, because the struggles that they are facing in their minority are struggles that we have to face at other times, right? And we might be a little bit ahead in certain perspectives, but we have to understand that there are other minorities and they'll continue, because this is something in my own journey I've seen, especially with individuals with disabilities, as we were creating content and bringing in mentors and telling people stories. It was an unknown bias of my own that I learned that, oh, you know what, I hadn't thought about that kind of issue. And when I started thinking about it, I've never worked with someone with a physical disability ever throughout my entire 20 years within STEM. And the fact that I've had zero interaction with anyone with a physical disability in STEM doesn't mean they don't exist. And we went out and we found them, but it was that same thing, that you yourself have biases that you don't understand until you learn about them. And that's the thing about humanity, that we have to keep learning what are those blind spots that, whether it was culturally, or whether it's the world or whatever it was that kind of imbued those things within us. We just have to be open to the fact that things that we don't know are incorrect right now in our own lives. We have to be open to fixing them once someone comes to us and says, hey, this is something that you've been struggling or doing inappropriately, and you have to grow yourself.
A thought came across my mind that you mentioned. The greatest ideas on earth may come from a person who is in the furthest corner of a classroom, that most people would say that child will never have a future, but yet their mind is processing information to a level where we could change the world with that idea. So what I'm hearing from you then is that we need to put in place structures that recognize kids that may not be the normal as of today's educational structure, and recreate it and rebuild it so that those kids do come to the surface with their ideas, and then the world benefits. How do you do that? How do you recommend that the educational structure change so that all ideas fit there, that there is a pipeline of ideas coming in that we can all benefit from?
Yeah, that's a bigger discussion and a tougher discussion to have. And really, I think Felix and people who have studied this are way more, have much greater skill set and be able to having these discussions than myself. But I will give a few points that I can think of, and then Felix, I'd love to get your discussion into this as well. But we have to, in my perspective, you have to go back to the root cause. So my medical training tends to have me look at things and trying to get all the data and try to put a differential diagnosis together, and then start trying to whittle down what are the potential solutions. I look at everything through a physician's lens. It's something that I tell my physician colleagues that they never really, they take it for granted, or they don't realize that the skill sets of how you train to diagnose and to treat can be applied to really any industry. You move away from the biology of a human machine and into other industries, and trying to break it down and trying to come out to a diagnosis. So you look at the history of how education has been brought here into the United States. I mean, education in the US has been focused primarily, came from an agricultural agrarian society when we were developing into an industrial society, right? And that's why we have the summer breaks, right? So the kids could go back and help their parents on the farm. But we've completely evolved away from that kind of an industry and that kind of a society now. Not 100%, but the majority of us are no longer living in those kinds of lifestyles. So you have to reinvent education really from the ground up. And this whole concept that you teach really to just generate one type of person to fit into one type of mold, it doesn't make sense at all. And realistically, it's a very lazy way of kind of trying to educate people. We have to understand that different kids are at different levels, and not everyone needs to go into STEM either. It's just we need to get more, because the lack of the representation also has to do with lack of economic inequality. But there's importance to understanding what are the skill sets and what's the passion of the individual too, whether it's their passion wants to go into the trades, or their passion wants to go into the arts, or their passion wants to go into the sciences. But being able to allow that diversity of thought and of evolutionary development within the child's minds, we have to be more open to that. And there are models out there. People are trying to do that, but for the vast majority, the educational system here is kind of one size fits almost no one. And so it's an issue.
I like
And
that.
so you need to we need to restructure it completely.
Right.
And then we have to think about what are the assets. I mean, the fact that when we COVID made us transition to virtual learning,
Right.
but teachers aren't taught virtual learning in schools. Correct me if I'm wrong, Felix, please. Like when you're getting your master's or your undergrad, you're not taught of how do you teach a virtual class. But realistically, now we have not only the ability, but the necessity, right? But as we go back, or if we go back, we need to be thinking about new methodologies of how teachers are taught, how the educators are taught through professional development and through their educational modules, to be able to think outside the box, or to think as if there is no box. And then we also have to take into consideration with the United States that there's a digital divide between communities. So even if you start teaching virtually, that doesn't mean you're gonna be able to reach everybody. So that's why it's a complex discussion, because there are complex problem sets. So you need to bring in the government to make sure that there's equality amongst access. Then you need to bring in academics to have a discussion of, how do you evolve teaching methodologies. And then obviously the marriage of the two, of how can you create hybrid models, not just hybrid personal to virtual, but hybrid into all the different types of settings that there are, all the different types of learners. And there's never going to be a perfect solution, because the country's too big and too complex, but you can do better, and we should do better, and we owe it to our kids to make sure that we do better by them. And at the end of the day, if we pour more energy, more time, more thought into the next generation, we're only investing in ourselves. It's only a win-win. So this concept of it's too expensive, it makes no sense to me. How can an investment in your future, an investment in yourself, be too expensive? That seems nonsensical and moronic to me. So in the role that we play at Astra specifically, is we're there to combine the entertainment and the educational side. We see our content to be able to be integrated into school districts and into lesson plans, and having educational modules built into our pipeline. And we're already doing that with partners like the PASS Foundation in Ohio and others, where they're taking our content, creating those modules, and then putting it into their workshops and into their school districts. And that's something that we see long-term, because we need to not just educate in different ways, but that part of inspiration has to be in there too, so that kids can start dreaming about what they can be, as opposed to, coming from Puerto Rico, just thinking about maybe athletics or the arts. Nothing wrong with those, but we want them to be equally thinking about being a doctor, being a nurse, being a physicist.
We're gonna give out. I'm gonna ask you contact information for our viewers to be able to learn more about what your project is. But let's throw this whole pyramid, huge, massive question on Felix's lap and see how he responds to that.
I was hoping that we were going to go to the next question. No,
No, you're not gonna get off of it.
yeah,
that
like Jose said, it's very complex, right? And there's a lot of different pieces that are interplaying there. The only thing I didn't hear you say, Jose, and it would just be to incorporate the student voice, right? And voices from our community, because a lot of times the conversations happen between, the governmental entities and the businesses or corporations that are, looking for the people with the careers. And it's like, what can we do to the community, not, for the community or with the community, right? So incorporating the student voice, Armando, in how to fix education, right? Because they're the ones who are experiencing it. And you spent, many years in the classroom, and firsthand what education does to shape students and student minds. So listening to those canaries in the coal mine, right, so to speak, and find out what's going wrong, what's pushing our students out, what's not working for them. I was just reading a study last night about, serving faculty members serving at Hispanic serving institutions and how they have to pivot their teaching style and pedagogy to work with students from that community, whether or not they are from the dominant background or Latino background. And so it's that, right? It's asking the questions and seeing how the students in the communities we're serving, what is of interest to them and how are we adapting our styles to their learning, right, as well. And like you said, Jose, the digital divide is huge, right? Being able to close that gap. Right now there's a lot of services that are in place because of COVID from, broadband agencies to do like emergency connectivity for internet. Families can get connected for free or for as little as $5 a month. That's going to go away at some point, right? But that doesn't mean the need goes away because, once COVID is over, hopefully, then people will turn around and start trying to make money off of those things again, and that gap will continue to widen. We have an ongoing crisis in Latino education, right? Latinx education. We are seeing more graduates of college that are Latinos more than ever, but when you look at it closely, the equity gap, based on the size of the community is growing, right? It's a smaller number of percentage of that greater community that is attaining higher levels of education. So it's this huge wave that's coming. And maybe we can pivot to the next question with like, as we look at future careers and things like, automation, robotics, AI, the importance of, again, diversity and having us represented in AI. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you see with that and the lack of diversity in AI development in the future?
Yeah, well, it's the same problem that it's in the rest of the STEM or STEAM fields. We already have a lack of diversity now, and if the data holds true, that divide is only going to be exacerbated. Not just the physical divide of not having the representation, but then the economic divide of not being in those fields. And artificial intelligence is a huge one. I mean, AI and automation, it's gonna touch every aspect. It already touches so many aspects of our lives, right? If you're watching something on TV, or if you're finishing a Gmail, or if you're putting in a Google search, machine learning is already involved in anticipating what you're doing or where you're going, or if you drive near something, or if you say something offhand, then you get an advertisement, right? We've all seen that. So it's in 100% of our lives already. It's only going to increase, and it's going to get more sophisticated and more complex. You're going to see robotics. You're already seeing them in warehouses, taking over more warehouse jobs, obviously more manufacturing jobs. Like people talk about, oh, we need to bring back manufacturing. Well, yes, people want more manufacturing from a logistics and supply chain perspective, but realistically, a lot of those jobs are going to be automated. So even though they may be back on shore, they won't be the same as they were, 50, 60 years ago, where you're going to have physical labor doing that. What you will have is a technician fixing the robots, right? And that's where the STEM field is very important, because the criteria of the people that work there are going to change. Same thing with car mechanics. I mean, as we get cars that are more advanced, it's the old school mechanical knowledge goes away, and you need more computer science than you need more mechanical science, yeah. Right? So it's the evolution of things, and it's going to affect every single thing. You look at restaurants. I mean, restaurants are already trying to play with automated services. We've seen that now with COVID even more, right? You go to a restaurant and you don't even have a menu anymore. You just have a little thing that's on your table, and you, with your own phone, you do, or you order things directly from your phone. You pay from your phone. You might not even see anyone. I mean, Amazon has full stores where you don't see any people. You just kind of walk in and walk out with what you want, and everything's automatically tracked. So it's going to be more and more and greater and greater. And artificial intelligence is a big driver of that divide, absolutely. And we need to be able to be prepared for that. So we need more people in computer science, in machine learning. And it's not just from a zeros and ones perspective of people that are actually doing it. We also have to be involved with the parts of the data sets that are being created to be able to build this automation. The reason that is because artificial intelligence, all it can do is replicate what's been done in history. So if the data sets that are already there have systemic bias or racial bias because of the system that created those data sets, then the artificial intelligence is just going to replicate systemic and racial bias. And we see that there's a great documentary right now on Netflix called Coded Bias, by some of my colleagues at MIT, which the main protagonist of it, she's a computer scientist, and she was creating an AI application based on facial recognition that she was trying to do for an app. And when she bought an off-the-shelf one, it didn't recognize her face. It would say no face detected. But then when she put on a white face mask, it was able to detect a face. And so when she started looking into the data sets, like why this happened, she looked into all the big ones, IBM, Amazon, Facebook. When she looked at what the data sets were, it was, I think, greater than 90 or 95 or 95% male. So obviously it didn't have enough females represented to be able to create an adequate application. And then it was like greater than 90%, 95% Caucasian. So she was an African-American female, so it was doubly. And the thing was that that foundational algorithms were the ones that are being used in things like healthcare, things in criminal justice. So the systemic inequality that was put in place because of that database then got perpetuated into all these other systems. And we're seeing that there's a ton of articles coming out where people put in this application, to be able to catch, to be able to scan a crowd and detect who might be a criminal, or to determine whether you need insurance coverage or not. And the AI or the algorithm puts out something racial. You saw, I think it was a few years ago, Microsoft put out an AI chatbot onto Twitter, where it just allowed it to learn from Twitter and be able to respond to people. And they had to take it down within 90 minutes because it became anti-Semitic and misogynist within 90 minutes, because it was just learning from Twitter, from Twitter input. And so it wasn't that the algorithm was racially motivated or had some sort of sexual bias. It was just that the data was. So if we are not a part of that evolution, then the systemic inequalities that have held back underrepresented communities, whether they be African-American, women, females, LGBTQ+, will be perpetuated into the future. So it's not just learning about it and being able to be a part of it, but it's also making sure that those databases are robust and equitable for all. But it really does help, because when you go back and look at who actually created, like, let's say that facial recognition software, they were all Caucasian males. So of course they weren't thinking about the fact that, oh, maybe we should get somebody that looks different from us to put into the data, because it was again their own kind of blind spot. It may have happened to us potentially. If it was us three, Latino males sitting around, potentially it would have happened to us too as well if we weren't thinking about it. But that's why diversity is so important. So you can at least have one person that doesn't look like you put their hand up and say, hey, there's a problem here. So that's the importance of why we need to be at the table. And they say that's that old adage that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. It holds up true forever and ever.
I'm going to take on the same question that I threw at you, and Felix also approached it, but I'm going to oversimplify it. And I emphasize oversimplify it. As an educator for many years and talking to many peers, I think what happens in education for me, my perspective is we never get to the question of why. We get into too much of the details, which are now in Google. I can bring it up in 2 seconds, but we never stop and get to the level and says, okay, why do you think this or that? And I think what you're bringing the question is that from the scientific point of view, that's the core of science, to ask why. So I see it from that level. If we merge this question and we embody it, I think our educational system will change from the bottom up.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's another issue, is that we don't elevate science into all fields the way we used to, or there's a lack of respect towards science in general, or the amount of time it takes. I mean, Felix just got a doctorate in education. I mean, that is not an easy undertaking. That takes sacrifice, it takes time, it takes money. But in today's culture, and it goes it goes back to us ourselves as a scientists not being out there and not being involved in popular culture. Social media has elevated ignorance, has elevated lunacy to the same level as scientific education. The fact that I spent until I was 34, 33 studying to be a physician, doctorate degrees, postdoctorate degrees, residencies, post-residency fellowships. And to think that people want to argue with physicians or with other scientists because of something that they read on some obscure blog by some obscure person or machine that may have written something random. It's just, we have this lack of respect for the scientific method and how we get to facts, how facts are derived. People don't get to choose facts. Facts are just what they are. Whether you like it or not, it's just the truth. And we tend to forget that. Like the sun is a chemical reaction of different perspectives, and it's not going to change. It's not a mythical or magical creature that comes and goes. It's not being pulled by, horses that kind of rotate around by some omnipotent being. It is what it is. Just because you choose to think it's something else doesn't mean that it's something else. It is what it is. So that's the thing that we have gone away from, and that's the thing also that we're trying to change it at Astra Media, is to elevate science as a whole for the entire community, because we've gone away from that, and it's dangerous. And we've seen the dangers that it can cause. It literally leads to loss of life, and it's unfortunate, and it's something that we have to be constantly fighting against, because I believe ignorance is at the core of so much, especially when it comes to inequality. Thinking of people as calling someone illegal, or calling someone a racial slur, or judging someone by who they love, or by the way that they were born. I mean, all that really at the end of its core comes out of a place of ignorance, and knowledge. I believe can be the thing that conquers most of those inequalities.
We're getting close to the end of the show. First of all, could you give us the contact information where our viewers can keep up with all the fantastic projects, especially your media one? And thank you for the book. I just loved it.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. So if everyone, thank you for the time, and follow us on social media. Instagram is the best way. Dr. Intergalactic, DrInterGalactic, Dr. Intergalactic on Instagram. And then our website is Ad Astra, which is something that astronauts say to each other a lot. It's Latin for to the stars. So Ad Astra, ADASTRA, STEAM, STEAM, media, media.com, Ad Astra STEAM media.com. And through our website or our social media, you'll be able to find links to buy our books. Our books are available on Amazon, Walmart, Target, Barnes & Nobles. Your local bookstore can order them too if you ask for them. We have more books coming out. They're all in Spanish and English. Always, we're starting to work on Spanglish books coming up, where they'll have both Spanish and English together.
Oh, cool.
So kids can have them. We have free comics online, free educational modules online for teachers. We have other ones that are going to be available for teachers to be able to just put into their classrooms if they want to download them or purchase them. And then we're also going to be going through a crowdfunding campaign here towards the end of the summer or early fall, where anyone that wants to invest into us will be able to do so to support and push the cause forward. And if there are folks out there that want to invest now, we're also doing that as well through different mechanisms. So anyone that wants to be a part of the story, or an ally in the journey, please reach out to us.
I want to be a part of it. And I know Felix also. Felix, final question and then closing statement, please.
For me, final question would be, what advice do you have for aspiring creators, aspiring authors, people who have the idea or concept that they want to do something, but they're not sure where to start?
Start small. Do something that you feel that you can do, that would be easy to do. Like start a small blog, write something on Medium, do something simple, and show it to your friends, show it to your family, and start from that perspective. Find allies, find groups in your local community, find groups online that can help you. There's that old adage. My dad was huge into adages, so o dichos en español. So that's why they just kind of come out of me, and I blame him. So when he hears this, he'll know it's his fault. But there's an old adage that is, I think it's from Africa, but if you want to go if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So find your allies, find your community, whether it's the family that you were born with or the family that you choose. Find them and help them on their journey. And hopefully they will help you on yours. And sometimes it's more powerful to help others reach their dreams. And through the universe, I think those things tend to come back. And you'll find doors and windows that tend to be open as you're trying to help others. And it helps also to get you out of your own mindset, because you start seeing the art of the possible in others, and it helps you kind of grow yourself. So if you're having problems, starting something on your own, help someone else start something. And then hopefully that will give you the motivation or the knowledge of how you do it yourself.
Wow. I'm going to ask you to share with us your closing statements, but my God, seems more like we're starting, not ending. But for the lack of time, please, your views.
From my perspective is, thank you, Felix, thank you, Armando, for giving me the opportunity to speak, and everyone listening to this and watching. The future is bright. I'm a strong believer in creating the world that you want to see, creating the world as you see it. And I believe we all have the capability to be world builders. I believe we all have that power within us. If you think about where we came from, we all have stardust in us. The stardust that's everywhere in the universe, that's inside of you. And we can create new universes, and we can create them in the way that we can see them, and we can create a better world. And we can do it together. So I would ask everyone who's out there who wants to be a part of this journey, come create worlds with us. We would love to have you on it.
Amen. Amen to that. I'm just overwhelmed with such fantastic ideas, the motivation, the idea that we have our social media, we can use it if we come out of our desks, stand in front of it, and share our best thoughts and motivate the future. And I think that's what you've done. I applaud what you've done. I know that Felix has been, while he's working his PhD, he's been doing that also on the side. I don't know how he did it, but he has. So as long as we keep listening to individuals like you, and we need to bring in Latinas as well to do the same thing, I think we're set for a better future. Gracias, Dr. José Morey. And
Gracias. Cuídate.
Éxito para ustedes. Thank you, Felix.
Gracias a todos.
Adiós.